Chapter 5 Massacre Island. By late afternoon, the brigade reached the wide place in the Ottawa River called the Lake of Two Mountains. Pierre's hands were puffy and blistered from paddling. His arms and shoulders ached, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. Charbonneau commanded, "Ship oars!" and Pierre and the crewmen rested their paddles on the gunwales. "That's only 25 miles today, fellows," the steersman said. "But we make up for our holiday tomorrow on the Long Sault." Pierre wanted to ask Charbonneau if he was joking about today being a holiday, but he feared Charbonneau was serious. Just then, McKay and Lapetite pulled alongside. "So which camp will it be, sir?" Lapetite asked. "We usually take the north," McKay replied. "It's the North Shore, then," Charbonneau agreed, adding, "How about a little race to see who tends the fires tonight?" Lapetite looked toward Pierre. "Are you sure you're up to it with that crew of babies?" A shout rose above the other voices. "Last canoe to shore gathers the wood!" Yells went up from the other crewmen, and in an instant the water was churning with the force of 70 paddle blades. Amazed at the sudden energy, Pierre did what he could. It was less than half a mile to the campsite, but that was too far for Pierre. Once he'd slipped on his forward stroke and splashed a mile. Another time his paddle twisted sideways. Charbonneau yelled, "Pull, LePage, pull!" His voice was a whiplash. Pierre glanced over his shoulder for help. Charbonneau nodded urgently at his own paddle and made a smooth stroke in the water, but Pierre's tired muscles managed only a weak chop. By now, the blisters on his right hand were bleeding. When the last canoe in the brigade passed them, Charbonneau said, "Another day, men," and they slowed to their normal pace. No one was in a hurry to reach shore, with teasing so sure to come. Can one bad paddler in 12 mean that much? Pierre wondered. If he didn't improve, he knew he'd be a burden to the whole crew. He remembered his father's advice. Pull your own weight, and you'll find no better friends than your canoe mates. Lapetite was waiting on the beach. "Glad to see you made it, fellows," he called. "I thought maybe you got lost, and we needed to put together a search party." The crewmen laughed. Pierre hunched down and tried not to be noticed. Even the quiet one, Bellegarde, joined in. "Hey, ladies," he called out as they unloaded. "You need some help? Maybe with those heavy parcels? Ha ha! It was a big day shopping, no?" The catcalls continued as they carried the freight up the bank. After they finished, Charbonneau asked Pierre, "How's my middleman?" Though Charbonneau's voice was kind, his eyes were the cold gray of a soldier on a mission. Pierre could tell he hated weakness. "Fine, sir," he said, hiding the crusted blood on his palm. But Lalonde was right behind them. He took hold of Pierre's hand and turned it over. "It's the right one, eh? The hand closest to the water always takes a beating. The water softens the skin." "It's all right." Pierre closed his hand as tightly as he could. "Just the same," Charbonneau said. "We'll keep you on the port side tomorrow. The sore one should dry out then." Lalonde agreed. "That should help. My hands were plenty soft when I was your age." Pierre couldn't imagine the broad-shouldered bowman ever having anything but calloused hands, but he appreciated Lalonde's gentle and fatherly tone. Pierre prayed that their plan would work. He worried that another day of paddling would turn his palm into mincemeat. Gathering firewood was not as bad as Pierre expected. It felt good to work those kinks out of his legs, and he tried to carry more than his share of the wood. As he bent to collect some kindling, Pierre felt the pain in his bottom for the first time. He wondered if the thin slats of the canoe seat would leave permanent creases on his backside. Emile Duval approached him. "If you feel a little stiff, that's normal," Emile said, brushing a shock of hair out of his eyes. "How long does it last?" Pierre asked. He was grateful for Emile's concern, and he knew that Emile would tell him the truth. "In a couple of weeks, you'll feel like you've been canoeing your whole life," he assured him. "Besides," he grinned, "paddling is nothing compared to a day with Naggy Maggie." Pierre smiled, recalling the nickname the older boys called Sister Margaret. Pierre had to admit that Sister could be mean at times, especially to the poorer students. "How nice of you to grace us with your presence, Monsieur Duval," she would greet Emile when he returned to school after a week of work in the fields. Emile meant to comfort Pierre, but 2 weeks sounded like forever. Since Emile was used to plowing and grubbing stumps and Pitching hay, paddling was like a vacation for him. But the small chores Pierre had done around his cabin left him unprepared for the brutal work. To make matters worse, he worried his years of schooling might have made him too soft to endure the voyage. What if his studies had turned him into a pale coward, a creature too frail to do anything but turn the pages in a book? Though he hated to admit it, Pierre knew he would rather do a month of algebra lessons than repeat the day of labor that had bloodied his hands. That evening was lye-soaked corn boiled with a few ounces of salt pork. It didn't appeal to Pierre, but the crewmen quickly lined up at the 10-gallon kettle, took their portions on tin plates, and shoveled it down. They sat anywhere, on a log or a rock or on the bare ground. Some didn't even bother sitting. They used homemade wooden spoons or just their hands, tipping their plates and licking the last few morsels. Beloy remembered his spoon, but could find no plate. Not caring to borrow a tin, he ate his meal out of his sweat-stained cap. As he sucked his fingers clean, Pierre looked away to keep from vomiting. After dinner, the men took their leisure with their pipes. Sitting before the fire and drawing out their tobacco pouches with great ceremony, they packed their clay bowls tight and then lit them with tapers pulled from flaming coals. There was little talk. For the moment it seemed right to sit back and soak in silence. Pierre watched the fire fall to embers as the dark came on. The night air was heavy with the scents of wildberry blossoms and birch catkins. The far-off music of the rapids drifting down over the camp made it easy for Pierre to forget his blisters. It was Lalonde who broke the spell. "Captain," he said across the fire to McKay, "it's amazing what a powerful thirst today's paddling can bring." "Would you like to borrow my cup then?" McKay said, "to fetch a good draught from the river?" "To tell the truth, I was thinking of something a bit more lively." "More lively than the Ottawa?" McKay shrugged his shoulders. Lalonde was quiet until Bellegarde and Michael Larocque, the wiry little middleman who helped the bowman lead his songs, appeared a minute later. Each man had a keg of brandy under his arm, and Bellegarde proudly announced, "Mr. McKay has ordered the liquor ration for the trip issued." The crew cheered, and Lalonde said, "We drink to Commander McKay." Pierre was amazed at how quickly the men crowded around Bellegarde, with their cups all ready in hand. The day he'd worked in the storehouse with La Petite, the big man explained that a few ounces of liquor were allotted to each man in the brigade. It was just enough for some small celebrating, but no voyageur would ever head north without his ration of brandy. McKay nodded politely to the men and then retired to his tent. As he walked past Pierre, the commander noticed the boy's frown. "I'm not being unsociable, lad. I'm just not a drinking man. The company says to issue liquor, so I give them their dram of poison early in the trip, and then I'm done with it." Pierre and Charbonneau were the only others to abstain. Charbonneau said he'd sworn off spirits several summers past, and everyone assumed Grandpa was too young. As Pierre took a seat on the aspen log, Beloy teased him. "Is our little lady friend afraid to taste something stronger than mother's milk?" Charbonneau reached out a hand to hold Pierre's back, but it was too late. He was up and digging in his pack for a cup. The first sip of brandy nearly gagged him. It burned his throat and his nose and made his eyes water, but he choked down a few more swigs. If he couldn't paddle like a voyageur, at least he could drink like one. The men celebrated at the same frantic pace as they paddled and ate. Clustering around the fire, they sang bawdy songs and took turns telling stories. A short while later, Larocque stepped forward and announced, "It is time for the test." Several men stood to take on his challenge. To Pierre's surprise, the test was jumping over the campfire. The men leaped over the fire the short way and then the long. Others joined in, laughing and clapping their friends on the back as they braved the flames. But after the fourth round of drinks, Larocque decided to make his course, as he called it, more challenging. He piled the fresh wood on the roaring fire and waited until the flames were crackling high. Then he leaped. He singed his leggings a bit, but others were quick to accept the new challenge. When Lalone took his turn, Pierre asked Charbonneau, "Why does Lalone have such white hair? He doesn't look that old." "He isn't. All I can say for sure," Charbonneau said, "is that it happened one summer about 10 years back. He left for the English River with hair that same sort of blonde as yours, and when he came back, his head was pure white. He wouldn't say what happened. It wasn't my place to ask, but I met a fellow once who was up on the English that summer, and there was an accident. He claimed a north canoe capsized in a rapids just after the icy melt. 7 men drowned. Lalone was the only one to survive, but there's no telling for sure." Just then there was a shout. Pierre turned to see Jean Beloy trip Lalonde as he leaped over the fire. His body twisted sideways and landed on his shoulder in the coals. A roll set him clear. The leather shirt saved his back, and Emile and Bellegarde saved his hair by throwing a blanket over his head while he lay, half stunned, in the sand. Bellegarde brushed Lalonde off and helped him to his feet, and then, before anyone could blink, Lalonde yelled, "You dog!" and leaped for Beloy's throat. Lalonde's hair was still smoking as the 2 men went down. They grappled and punched with a fury that looked certain to end in death. A circle formed, and everyone cheered his favorite. "Beloy will kill him," Emile said, but his tone, Pierre could tell, he was disappointed that the reverse wasn't true. "Come on, Lalonde, get him!" Pierre yelled, fearing this good-humored fellow would get hurt. Pierre clenched his fist and swung in the air. He wished he could pummel the evil Beloy himself. The crewmen alternately cheered and sipped their brandy. A man offered to fill Pierre's cup, but he shook his head. Pierre already felt dizzy from the strong drink, and when he tried to focus on the grappling fighters, their faces blurred together. Twice Lalonde and Beloy rolled dangerously close to the fire, but Bellegarde rolled them away. When it was clear neither man would gain an advantage, Charbonneau said, "Let's give Beloy a dram of his own poison." "A little singe will do him," Bellegarde agreed. The next time Beloy rolled toward the fire, everyone stepped aside. It took Beloy a while to realize his moccasins were on fire. When the pain finally hit him, he let out a shout and rolled his opponent into the brush. Bellowing like a wounded bull, he kicked off his smoking moccasin and leaped feet first into the shallows. Pierre expected Beloy to return with a knife, but the man was grinning when he came back from the river. He walked up to Lalonde and shook his hand. "Well fought, Hivernot," he said. Lalonde returned the compliment. "You gave me more than I wanted, Jean." They embraced, and while Beloy sat down in the sand and wrapped his burned foot in his red cap, Lalonde poured his opponent a drink. Is it like this all the time?" Pierre asked Charbonneau. "Sometimes," he smiled. "But it's the first few nights mainly that get so wild. When the tension of waiting all winter to get back in their paddles mixes with the brandy." He waved toward Lalonde and Beloy sitting side by side. "There you have it." A few men had already crawled under the nearest canoe and retired for the night, so Charbonneau and Pierre decided to do the same. "It's best we take a good place," the veteran advised. "The air gets chilly in the open this time of year." They found a Montreal canoe a few paces from the campfire and laid their blanket under the hull. Pierre was exhausted, but sleep did not come easily. The ground was lumpy, and every turn forced his hip or elbow against a rock. Even worse, Charbonneau was already snoring on one side, while Beloy and Lalonde kept chatting just up the bank. Pierre suddenly had a terrible headache, too. "You know that island?" Beloy said. "The one just this side of the rapids?" "What about it?" "When I was down there on the bank staring into the moonlight, I swore I was looking on Massacre Island. The one up on Rainy River, where the priest and 18 of La Vérendrye's men were murdered. My old partner Joseph Leclerc was in the party that found them. It was plenty ugly. He said the bodies were spread out on buffalo robes in a circle with their heads, most of them scalped, piled in the middle. Some had knife cuts and patterns all over their backs. Others had porcupine quills stuck in their legs. They left the priest in the center with his right hand stuck straight up in the air and an arrow in his side. His head was split clear open." Lalonde whistled softly, and then it was quiet. A short while later, Lalone crawled under the far end of the canoe, and Beloy lay right down in the open ground. They both began snoring immediately. Pierre turned over again and again, but sleep wouldn't come. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed that his father and mother and his sister were lying in a circle on their huge buffalo robe with their arms over their head. Their faces were smiling as bravely as they had this morning when they said goodbye. But next to a silver hatchet in the center of the circle lay Beloy's cap, heaped to the top with severed thumbs.